Not much to actually say about Switch 2 news-wise this week, except that it's looking like being one of the biggest, if not the biggest, console launch of all time. 3.5 million units sold through in 4 days, according to Nintendo. It is officially the fastest-selling Nintendo system ever, and there's been various analysts saying it could be the fastest console launch ever. Oliver, impressive stuff, right?
Yeah, I think this is interesting news overall. I'm glad to see that Switch 2 is resonating with audiences to a large degree here. But there is one big caveat to news like this, which is that consoles almost always sell out at launch, and that quantity sold isn't really an expression of demand, it's more an expression of supply, because demand almost always outstrips supply. Like if you look back at the Wii U launch, that console also sold pretty well in its first few months. Not nearly as well as this did, but there are examples in history of consoles selling out during the launch period and not succeeding well later on. But I think Nintendo has done a pretty good job trying to match demand with supply, though, because they've been assembling units for months and months, which may be in part because of a delay to the console's release. We are not quite sure, but internally, apparently there was a delay from 2024 to 2025. I think they've done a really good job. Like I was at a GameStop for the Switch 2 release, and there must have been 300 people in line, but they had at least 300 consoles because everyone in line got one, and it took like 6 hours to clear the line. But it really reflects a really high level of supply that almost like everyone I know who wants a Switch 2 and tried to get one has basically gotten one in some form. So there is a good match of supply and demand there. But yeah, I think that beyond that, like the concept of the device, it's very much like a Switch, obviously, very much an iterative upgrade over the Switch, but I think it is basically successful in a lot of the respects that Nintendo has tried to lay out here. It is basically a generational increase in visual quality, has interesting functions like game chat. Obviously, the fact that it has I think a relatively strong lineup from my perspective at launch is also favorable, although people contest that somewhat. Mario Kart World is obviously great. So I feel like Nintendo has done about as good of a job as could be expected given the circumstances of launching the Switch 2 successor console. But I wouldn't take necessarily the fact that it's selling so incredibly well initially as a really strong sign of the console's long-term success. I would just say that it's a strong indication that at least Nintendo hasn't bungled this one at all. I think they've done a pretty good job. We'll have to see in the coming months and years exactly, like, is this going to be another Switch-like success? Is it going to be more like the 3DS where it's a moderate success, things like that? We're going to have to see where it falls within that kind of continuum, I think.
I was just reading this report from Video Games Chronicle. In fact, I'm just going to read it out. It says basically that Nintendo is looking to reach a target of 15 million units sold in the first business year. So, getting 3.4 done in 4 days is pretty impressive. But this paragraph was quite interesting. If Switch 2 surpasses 15 million units in its opening years, it will beat what the original Switch managed. PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5 launched later in the year and sold around 7.5 million units each, with the latter suffering stock issues due to the pandemic. So, I think they could be on track for beating records here, albeit, as you say, Oliver, it's more of a supply issue rather than a demand issue. I think you're quite right there. Overall, though, in terms of what this launch has delivered, yes, there has been only one key game, really, Mario Kart World. I understand that Cyberpunk 2077 is the top-selling third-party game. However, John, I don't know what you think about this, but I don't think it's that there's been like a lack of content for the launch. I mean, we're struggling to keep up with everything that's actually come out in terms of third-party software, upgrades to existing Switch games, just the acceleration factor of the old games running so much better on the new hardware. If you buy a Switch now, there's plenty to do, isn't there?
Yes, I would agree overall. The main issue there actually stems from the fact that most of that stuff is already existing content.
Yeah.
It's very specifically in the DF wheelhouse, right?
Yes.
Because it's about old things running better, or running to, being able to test stuff. But in reality, there's not really that much that's like new. It's mostly like already existing titles. I mean, you've got Mario Kart, of course, which is great. There's Fast Fusion, which is great. And a few other little things like that, but not much that's original. So in that sense, it's a weaker launch than usual. And I guess the big concern and whether they can keep the momentum going is, what does the future look like for this? because with the original Switch, they had an absolutely amazing like first year of like the game plan with just like big stuff like coming down the pipeline, right? Like the fact that they had both that a new genre defining Zelda game at launch, which was also on Wii U, but
Yep.
whatever. And then they had like a brand new 3D Mario game later in the year, along with all those other titles, Splatoon 2, you know, ARMS and various other things, and lots of original third party stuff scrambling to get on there. It was a very exciting period where this time I feel like the game plan going forward isn't as it's not as clear in terms of like where we're going next. And I've also kind of gathered, you know, from I guess secondhand sort of information here, but like that Nintendo's been a little bit hesitant to allow developers to even release versions of their games for the Switch 2. Like, oh, maybe this is better off as a Switch 1 game still. So I feel like there's going to be a little bit of a dearth of content just for the Switch 2 coming forward for a little bit. That could become an issue. Like, I don't think any of this is going to affect the real long-term success of it, but it feels like it's off to a less exciting start than the original Switch was.
Okay.
And we'll see where that goes from here. And because the Switch 2 needs to be a success, I think, for the health of the industry at this point. There's a lot riding on this. It's not just Nintendo's success. Like, a lot of companies are looking at this, and if the Switch 2 were to not succeed in a big way, it could spell real disaster for the games industry as a whole. I think.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oliver, 3.5 million units in 4 days, which essentially, as I understand it, beats out every PC handheld sold since the Steam Deck came out in 2022. I mean, they are very different things, even though there is a certain degree of crossover, right?
Yeah, I would expect that with the PC handhelds, it's much more about targeting the enthusiast market. And I'd also, by the way, think this is probably the case for the upcoming PlayStation handheld that's been so heavily rumored as well. I think that it's much more about extracting more value out of the same group of customers, but not creating a fundamental split in terms of platform. Like, we're continuing to support the PC platform, or we're continuing to support the PlayStation platform. We just have another console or another device on which you can play those games. So I think it is a bit of a different market. Like, in comparison, Nintendo needs the Switch 2 to do well. They don't have another option. There's no plan B. It needs to sell through. It's a new platform. Like, they need it to be a success. And like you said, John, a lot of publishers also need it to be a success, especially in this kind of two-pronged world where we have Sony delivering, successful consoles, Nintendo delivering successful consoles, and then Microsoft kind of looking more towards PC. That's also a little bit of a challenge potentially for a lot of game makers. But overall, I think 3.5 million is a great marker of success in the early days, but it's not necessarily representative of where the console will be in a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. That will take time.